Welcome. In this video, you'll learn how to master one of Excel's most powerful features, pivot tables. Here's what you'll learn today. How to create a pivot table from scratch. How to use filters, columns, rows, and values. How to sort and analyze your data instantly. And how to turn messy data into clean reports. In just a few clicks, if you've ever struggled with data in Excel, this video is going to make things so much easier for you. So don't forget to subscribe and turn on the bell, because smarter Excel skills start right here. Let's get started. So at this point, we have all of our data sorted and organized and cleaned up, so it's ready to go and ready to create awesome pivot tables, and we've formatted it into a table so that it's dynamic, so that it's easy to update our pivot tables if we add information in here. So the first thing you want to do is sort of check your data in a pivot table to make sure that it's reading everything correctly. So what I want to show you is if I scroll down, you'll see that I have 63 rows here, and one is the header at the top. So that means we have 62 rows of data in this table. So we're going to create a little pivot table that just counts those rows to make sure that everything's working. So we'll go to our Insert, go to Pivot Table, and this gives us a pivot table pop-up. And it says choose the data you want to analyze, and you can see that this is selecting our full table here according to its name, which is perfect. And then choose where you want the pivot table report to be placed. Now you could do it on this existing worksheet, but things tend to get a little muddy. So we're going to go with the default of New Worksheet, and we just click OK. And you'll see it brings up a brand new worksheet here with a couple of new fields. One of them is this box right here, and this is actually your pivot table. It just doesn't have anything in it yet, which is why it says to build a report, choose fields from the pivot table field list. So as long as we are clicked in here, you'll see that this pivot table fields pop-up comes up. Now if I click out of that, you'll notice it disappears because I'm just working in a blank cell. So as long as I'm working inside this pivot table, it's going to give me these fields over here, and this is where all the magic happens. Now this is also where things tend to start getting confusing, and it becomes a little intimidating for most people. So I'm going to go through this part kind of slow, and we're just going to start really simply. But understand that even going slow, it might be a little confusing at first. So this would be a great part of the video to maybe watch a couple of times if it doesn't make perfect sense to you. But believe me when I say once you get this figured out, you're just going to be dragging and dropping these things into different places, and you're going to be creating these pivot tables that are just doing all kinds of cool calculations in a snap. And you'll have a lot of fun with this. Once you figure this out, it's easy to kill an hour just playing with things and seeing what you can come up with. But as I said, we're going to start out by just doing a simple count to make sure that our pivot table is working correctly. So you'll notice that all of these items right here are headers in my table. Remember, we have the sales rep names, we have the region east or west, the item, like a rug or a fireplace, the price of the item, the category it's in, like kitchen, bath, living room, etc., and then the day of the week. So the way that you create a pivot chart is you basically take these different headings and you grab them with your mouse and you drag them into one of these boxes. And these boxes are what create your pivot table over here. So I'm going to drop the days of the week into values right now. And you'll notice that it changed it and says count of day. And what that's doing right here, so it's created a tiny little pivot table, and all it's doing is saying the count of days in the chart. So it's counting all of the rows that have a day in my chart, and it's come back with 62. And remember that when we're looking at our sheet, that if I scroll down, we have, not including our headers, at the top we have 62 entries. So that means that this is counting all the rows, and our pivot table is working perfectly. So here's where pivot tables are cool, because I can easily modify this, change it, or get rid of it by simply grabbing this heading here, dragging it out of one of these 4 boxes, So I can go to up here, or I can go onto the sheet and see how there's an X there. That means that if I let go of the mouse, it's going to take it out of this box. When I let go of the mouse, see, it removed it from the values area, and it cleared my table back to being blank. So now let's get into this and really learn what these areas do. So this first box here is called the filters. And what that's going to do, if I drop something in there, let's drop the region in there, it's going to put a little bar up at the top here, and I can click on this, and I can sort by region. So right now it's set on all, so that means that any data in a table down below here is going to include all the regions. But if I just wanted the data in the table down here to include the East region, I could just click on East and click OK, and now it's going to sort all of this by East. So for now, we'll leave this on all. So that's filters. The next one is columns, and columns is going to be, just like it sounds, columns that extend out horizontally in your chart with lists of data underneath them. So let's take the day over here and put it in columns. And you can see how quickly that just pops all these different days of the week right into the pivot chart. Now, real quickly, notice how this says column labels. What Excel does is it basically adds these new names to your fields. But this can sometimes be confusing if you're not used to using Excel. So one way to kind of clean up these headers here is to go to your pivot table tools, click on Design, and go over here to Report Layout. And click the drop-down. Right now it's showing it in compact form. If you go down here to Tabular form and click that, notice how that changes from column labels to day. So now it's using the actual field header, and it makes a lot more sense. So, because clearly these are the days of the week. So now we have the region up here in our filters and the days in our columns. Now let's get some of the big ones in there so we can actually start doing some calculations. So now we're going to take the sales reps, and we're going to drop them down into the rows. And of course, the rows also lines up just like you would imagine. Each sales rep name is listed in its own row. So you can see how we have a table starting to come together here. We have our columns with the days of the week and our rows with our reps. And so pretty much the next logical thing here would be to grab the price and drop that into the values section. And so now we have all four parts of a pivot table working and active right now. So we have a filter, we have columns set up, we have rows set up, and we have values in the middle. So those are the four parts that will make up any pivot table, and some will have only one or two of those parts, and others will have all four. But those are the four parts that you'll see in any given pivot table. So what this table is doing is it's taking all of our sales reps and all of their sales for the whole week, and it's telling us how much they sold each day, and it's totaling all of the rep sales down at the bottom. And what we want to do is sort this to make it a little cleaner. So we right-click, go to Sort, sort largest to smallest. So that's going to sort our totals. So already this table is telling us a ton of information. First, it's telling us that Jane is our top sales rep for the week by a landslide. It's also telling us that Mac, Helen, and Marcy are kind of struggling. Or maybe it's telling us that they're on vacation, or you see these gaps in the sales. It's also giving us a grand total of all of the sales for the week, and a total of all the sales for each day. And by the way, we can also sort this row, largest to smallest. So we go Sort, largest to smallest, and we can easily see now that Sunday is our biggest day, followed by Saturday, followed by Tuesday, and all the way down to Thursday and Friday, which were our smallest sales days. So that's the basics of a simple pivot table and some examples of how powerful it is to quickly analyze your data. Real quick, I want to go over the sort of layout of a pivot table one more time to make it really clear, and then in the next lecture, we'll go into some other versions of pivot tables so you can see kind of the possibilities and the potential of the analyzing power of it. So the one thing that gives most people confusion at the beginning is you start grabbing these things and dropping them into these boxes, and then all these things just start popping up here. And sometimes it's hard to know why that's there and where it's coming from. Let me just go over the layout of this, because these 4 boxes will always go to the same place on this pivot table. And once you're familiar with that, it becomes a lot less confusing why things are popping up where. So the first part is the filters. And the filters always show up here at the top, outside of the main table. And it always has a little drop down, and you can click on it to sort it by the elements in that filter. So we can click East here and click OK. And you'll notice that our table shrunk. Now it only has 4 reps: Bob, Robert, Joe, and Helen, because those are the people who work at the East store. We can also go back and click West. And now it has 5 reps: Jane, Carol, Casey, Mac, and Marcy, because those are the people who work at the West store. So you can see it's completely changing our table based on these filters. The second one is the rows. And the rows are always going to be right down this left column, lined out in rows. So by dropping my sales reps into the rows area, I know that it's going to show up down this left-hand column. Okay, the next one is columns. The columns are always going to go across the top here. So by dropping my days of the week into the columns area, I know that the days of the week are going to extend across the top of my table. And the last area is the values area. And the values area is always going to be what shows up inside of your table. And so by dropping the price into the values area, the price is what's going to show up in here. And you'll notice that this says sum of price. You can change that by clicking on this drop down and go to Value Field Settings, and see it brings up this pop-up. You can rename this, give it a custom name, or you can change what it's doing here. So for instance, we could change this to the average sales per rep per day. Click OK, and instead of totals, it's going to calculate averages. Of course, that's not a very useful calculation in this situation. So we're going to go back to Value Field Settings and go back to Sum. But those 4 areas are always going to show up in the same area on your pivot table. And that's just really important to keep in mind, because as we start dragging these around, it's going to help you a lot.